And Amy, and I'll tell you, it's a bit confusing to me. So we find that the Democrat National Committee brushed aside warnings from the FBI that his computer network had been breached by hackers linked to the Russian government. This, according to a New York Times investigative report that was published yesterday. This is months in advance of it actually, this kind of leveling up to public recognition. And the DNC and President Obama didn't do anything in response to this identified breach.
Well, why did they sit on their hands?
Maybe it was
What was in it for them? Because they're very cold and calculated.
The FBI attempted to alert a DNC tech support contractor that a hacker had breached the committee's protected network. The staffer conducted a brief search of the DNC computer system logs to look for signs of intrusion. Even after the FBI continued to call over several weeks, the tech worker did little to heed the Bureau's warnings. According to an internal memo, the staffer said he had no way of differentiating the call I just received from a prank call. Okay, you get a call from the FBI and you can't distinguish it from a prank call. Really? This is so-and-so from the FBI.
Oh, really?
Please look into that. Give me, and I'll get back to you. Thank you for that. I mean, that's just absurd. The Obama administration, according to the Times, was reluctant to respond forcefully because they didn't want to escalate tensions with the Russians. They were still trying to navigate the Syrian matter. So they didn't do anything to deal with Russian hacking, so they could then not do anything to deal with Russia's support for Bashar al-Assad and propping up his regime, which has just now been effectively solidified for the foreseeable future after the Assad regime has now regained control of Aleppo. And this is all on Donald Trump and the Republicans. They're the concern vis-a-vis Putin. That's not what Charles Krauthammer had to say.
Yeah, and Charles, obviously, Reince Priebus and others are saying Russia didn't make Hillary Clinton not stop in Wisconsin. They didn't make the economic message not, identify with blue-collar workers. They are pushing back hard. But the overall concern about Russia doing anything is real, not only on the Democratic side, but on the Republican side.
The overall concern is real. The idea that it gave the election to Donald Trump, I think, is absurd. The intelligence agencies themselves are split. There's no way to discern intent without having a source inside, and we don't. But the real issue is this. There's an extensive report on how this thing developed over 18 months. With the Obama administration knowing about this, knowing about all kinds of intrusions by the Russians through others, and the passivity of Barack Obama in the face of this is simply staggering.
There you go. The passivity of Barack Obama in the face of this. Had knowledge. Why didn't they act? Because they were playing this geopolitical game with Russia, trying to manipulate them with respect to Syria. That went real well.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing Putin responds to more favorably than passivity. I mean, more favorably for his position, not ours. So just include that in your understanding of the overheated rhetoric you're getting from the Dems with respect to Russian hacking as they seek to undermine the legitimacy of Trump's election. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Michael Rubin, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, author of a couple of books, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan.
So what about this Russian hacking matter in the context of the political prism through which the Democrats are trying to prosecute the case, but now in light of this New York Times report about the knowledge, the a priori knowledge that Democrats had about the hacking and did nothing?
Well, when it comes to Barack Obama and John Kerry and the attitude towards Russia, it reminds me of Charlie Brown with Lucy, where unfortunately we're Charlie Brown and we're just trusting that the Russians aren't going to lift that football up and make us fall on our backs, that just one more time of trusting them and everything will be okay. Unfortunately, it seems that Barack Obama just has bad instincts. He had bad instincts when he ridiculed Mitt Romney for saying that Russia was an enemy, and he had bad instincts for when he described the Islamic State as a JV team. what really gets me, however, is the efforts and the enthusiasm with which people are blaming Russia for this, whereas we know that the Chinese have hacked the Office of Personnel Management, taken 20 million records of U.S. government employees, and we can't bring ourselves to officially accuse them. That's why people are up in arms and saying these accusations are all political.
So President Obama didn't get tougher because he didn't want to lose influence with Russia in Syria?
That's about right, Amy. He kept hoping that with just a little bit more trust of Vladimir Putin, that Vladimir Putin would start responding. It really has been the tale of the Obama White House that they are so egotistical, so navel-gazing. They believe so much in the power of their own rhetoric that they believe that these other guys will simply come along and recognize the wisdom of the Barack.
And of the Barack.
That's nice. I like that. Hashtag trademark.
Yeah, and what about the CIA? There's been some contentions and op-eds over the weekend in light of the back and forth, the political accusations about Putin's influence in the election and the election outcome. There's been some talk that the CIA report that's at odds with the FBI in some important substantive areas like the hacking of the RNC, which the RNC and the FBI said didn't happen, and the CIA effectively said it did. That the CIA has become politicized like so many other agencies, and that at least some of the document that was leaked to the Washington Post is a political statement, not an intelligence estimate.
Well, I mean, I'm saying this as a former government official that would use CIA documents and reports. I'd have them delivered to my desk. And one of the things to understand about the CIA is they never say anything outright. They always couch what they want to say because their interest is bureaucratically covering their own behind. So you've really got a situation where you can look at a CIA report and draw any conclusion you want from it because they're not going to be 100% certain on anything. They're always going to hem and haw. That said, the CIA is politicized. There's one quote in a magazine that drives me nuts. It was from 2005 in the American Prospect, which is a very left-of-center magazine affiliated actually with John Podesta. And what it said was basically talking about the Kerry-Bush election. It was interviewing a CIA guy, and it was like he was talking about his colleagues and how they were selectively leaking things, and I quote them saying, "They'll never elect this man," meaning Bush now that this is out there. You know, a lot of the CIA guys who might be playing politics may think that they're winning a political battle on any particular policy, but really it is a Pyrrhic victory because when you have CIA guys out there playing politics, just like when you have Pentagon officials out there playing politics, ultimately it erodes the reputation of the institution which they serve.
And don't you think people inside the CIA know who the leaks are from the CIA?
Well, put it this way. They may not know who the leakers certainly know who they are. The question is, why aren't you investigating that when you're investigating other things?
Turning to Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of State, some call him T-Rex. I've come up with a new moniker. You ready for this?
Okay, I'm ready.
Rexon.
Oh, nice.
What do you think?
That's actually pretty good.
Thank you. I'll let you use that as long as you attribute it to me, Michael.
Fair enough, I will.
So what about Rex Tillerson? Some questions raised, mainly from people who don't know him and mainly from the usual suspects like Lindsey Graham, about him in that role. But he's also lined up a lot of Republican political support, Dick Cheney, Condi Rice, Mitch McConnell, John Cornyn, Paul Ryan, Bob Corker, all saying very nice things about him. Your assessment of both that choice and the possibility that he'll have any problems getting confirmed?
Well, the reason why people are so upset with him is, number one, because of his relationship with Russia, and number two, because he has come out so forcefully against sanctions, which are an important tool of statecraft. That said, look, Donald Trump isn't someone who I personally like a great deal. That said, elections matter. He won, and therefore he deserves an open opportunity to get the staff he wants, and until they do something wrong, until they do something that contravenes the law, they deserve our support. Now, in this case, it's a very interesting pick because, number one, just because you're a head of a business and you're advocating for your business doesn't mean that when you're put in the head of an institution like the State Department, which, by the way, is half the size of Exxon, so it's a lot smaller than Exxon, it doesn't mean you're not going to be advocating for your country. And so I'd like to see, the question is whether it's leadership or ideology. In the case of T-Rex or Rexon, it could simply be leadership skill. And, the State Department does need a makeover when it comes to bureaucracy, when it comes to efficiency and so forth. So putting someone from the private sector in charge, that may not be a bad choice. And we'll see what happens when it comes to the choices he makes with regard to policy.
And some experience he's had, not just in terms of dealing with heads of state generally, but also dealing with rogue nations. So the Wall Street Journal points out in an op-ed yesterday that, I'll quote the Journal editorial, he certainly knows how to do bilateral diplomacy better than senators who opine from their soapboxes. He also knows about global thugs, having had Exxon's Venezuela assets seized by that socialist regime. So he's had a lot of geopolitical interaction the world over during his tenure as CEO of Exxon.
Well, that's absolutely true. And one of the other issues that's out there is that Congress doesn't necessarily get to pick the man it wants. It's Donald Trump's decision, but the Congress has oversight. Now, over the last 15 or 20 years, basically ever since Jesse Helms retired, you haven't really had much oversight coming from Congress. And if Congress doesn't like the policy of the State Department, Republicans or Democrats, they can legislate in order to constrain it. They should do their job rather than simply try to say, we're not going to allow Trump to make his pick.
But don't you think he's going to have a little tough time in the committee hearings? I mean, if he's dealing with 50 countries, yes, he knows people, he has got contacts all around the world, but he'd be the first Secretary of State with no government experience or military experience. And his relationship with Russia, I mean, if the U.S. sanctions are lifted on Russia, he and Exxon stand to make anywhere from $10 to $500 billion.
Well, I mean, first of all, if we could reverse that and look at the number of secretaries of state that have had no business experience in the real world, the number would frankly be astounding. And I don't mean sitting on a board here or there after they retire. I mean actual business experience. In this case, there's a normal procedure for this. I mean, even at my level, which is a relatively junior level, I had to declare my assets. In the case of Rex Tillerson, he's going to have to put things into blind trust, but so be it. He'll do that. I don't think he's going to be taking over the job of Secretary of State, a relatively thankless position, in order to make a quick buck. He could do that simply by sitting pretty in Exxon.
No question. All right. He is Michael Rubin, resident scholar for the American Enterprise Institute, the author of Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael Rubin, thanks so much for joining us as usual. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.